threshold, then into the stranger. If you don't start, you will never get there. In stillness, fingers reach for the golden thread. The inner voice that is so frequently misread. Sorrow's army as a boundless force. So drop your burdens and your parcels of remorse. Every seed will one day just leave us. Use your time well, because it's loads of you love and Today is heroism. Today is falling away. We're not confined to ashes. We are the link, not the chain.
Hi, I'm very sorry for being a little bit late. I managed to enter the wrong link. So my apologies for that. Please post the link where you are joining us from today. I am talking to you from London, and today our topic is about chords. So I really love this topic because one of the things that's tricky when you are learning guitar is it's obviously very hard to play the chords. And we've got Simon here who's gonna, I'm just shuffling him in really quickly. Simon from acousticguitarlessonsonline.net, and he is going to tell us his 5 favorite ways of leveling up chords. So one of the reasons I think this is really important is because when you learn chords to begin with, and you've learned the open chords, it's quite clear you have to learn some chords or you can't play anything, you can't write any songs. And then quite often the next thing to learn is bar chords, and they're quite a handful, but they mean that we can play any major or minor chord we want. And then it can be quite tough to know what to do next. Are you going to learn, any one of 103 ways of playing an E7 altered chord? If you're into jazz, you probably are, but which of those 90 versions are you going to learn, and why, and in what order, and how's that going to help you with the music you want to play and write? I used to be very interested in writing songs with complicated chord progressions, but what I now realize is that I was after something that sounded interesting. And so because I didn't know many forms of chords, that meant using all the ones I knew. But you can do so much with a relatively small number of chords depending how you're approaching it. So once again, really apologies for starting this a few minutes late, but it is a great topic and I'm really looking forward to what Simon's going to share with us. Simon, you're going to give us your 5 favorite ways to level up your chord playing. My guitar is at the ready. I know I'm going to learn a lot from this. Take it away. What's one of the 5?
Okay. So, yes, so we're looking at things to do that aren't really any harder than open chords and bar chords. And I don't think there's probably going to be very minimal barring here, which is probably good news, right? For a lot of people, if any at all, maybe a little bit. But I've chosen things when I was thinking about this that are basically at the same level of open chords and bar chords, okay? So the first thing is open strings. So I like to use a lot of open strings. You can use open strings in a lot of creative ways on the guitar to create really nice sounds. So I'm not talking about open chords. Of course, they've got open strings and they're in the open position. But here, I'm talking about different ways of utilizing open strings. So one is to use triad shapes. So triads are no harder to play than open chords. The shapes are basically the same requirements needed to play most triad shapes, all triad shapes really. So the only additional thing that might make it a little bit more challenging is the movement around the fretboard, but then you're doing that with bar chords, so it's all in the same sort of basket there. But a triad is simply a 3-note chord, and we can play them all over the fretboard, and that's the foundation to all chord playing. So triads are great for many reasons, but in this context, let's say we have a chord progression G, E minor, D to C. So it's a 1, it's a 6, it's a 5, and it's a 4 chord progression. And I'm going to take that progression and I'm going to first work it out using triads. And there's many ways that you could do this, but I'll go with a pretty simple way here, and that would be to use a root position triad for the major chords of the progression. So we had a G major chord in our progression. So here's a little G major triad on strings 4, 3, 2 with my third, second, and first fingers. That's the same as a little F open chord shape there, or a C chord shape. It's across a larger range of strings there, but again, no harder to play, just in a different position. And then we could take that for the D chord of the progression and play it up in the D position with root note D on the 4th string, and the C would be 2 frets lower, so at the 10th fret or in the 8th position from the first finger. And then, so that's the major chords of the progression. And then the E minor, I'm going to take this little minor shape here, which is really just part of the E minor bar chord. If we just take the 3 top notes, if you like, or mid sort of notes of that chord there, we get a little E minor triad. But this one is not in root position. It's got a different bass note. But you don't need to understand all the theory here. Let's not get sort of sidetracked by that. So the first step is I can take that and I can play that chord progression using the triad shapes. Now already that's something that you could use that's not going to be your standard open chords bar chords. You could just pick out a little picking pattern on the triad shapes. And that can sound nice as a little solo guitar part, or someone could be playing the larger chords and you could be picking that over the top for a really nice second part. So triads are great for that type of thing. But I like to also bring in the open strings, as I was saying earlier. So because of the key G, open strings work great because all the open strings are in the key of G. Okay, so there's certain keys that work better for this than others. So that being the case, when I play each of the triad shapes, I can play the open string on top because I'm only playing notes on strings 2, 3, and 4. So that gives me that open string quality to my progression. Which sounds really nice and does fill out the sound a little more if you are playing on your own. So
there's a couple of things I want to point out about that I think are of particular interest. One is that there's typically if you play most chord shapes on guitar, the notes go up. So if I do this, the notes are going up all the time. Each note is higher than the last note. Sure. That's fine. But when you're using an open string like that, the way that you're using it there, you've got the as you move the triads up, the notes don't all go up. The last note, the open note, is going to be lower. And so that immediately, the fact the notes are not just going up, but they're going da 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 da, kind of adds a melodic dimension to what's happening.
Yeah.
So and that's so that's something that I think is really interesting to explore on guitar, because as soon as you change whether the notes are all going up or not, that inherently brings in some really nice, satisfying kind of contrast.
Yes, absolutely. So that's one of the things that, it does, definitely. It's less predictable, if you like. And to sort of add to that, what I like to do with triads a lot of the time too is, coming back to our example here, is take out the highest note in the chord. So technically it's not a triad anymore. It's still enough to be the chord, but I'm taking out the note on the second string of each triad and replacing it with the open string. So we get more of an open string quality here. And as your point, Deanna, with the notes will become less predictable too. So that progression now, if I do that, I can take out the first finger on the G, and you really hear more open quality, and you do that with the E minor, and then our D, and our C. So G, the E minor, and the C. So now there's lots of different places you can play these triads, so you can really go to town on that idea. But when you take out that additional finger and you get the additional open string, it makes it even easier to play. I mean, they're 2-note chords, right? Along with the open strings. And of the 2-note chords, 3 of them are identical. And then you've got this little one here representing the E minor of the chord progression. So another, just in the same area here, another way to use open strings. It's kind of like as a kind of a pedal point, if you like, or let's say we'll change key here. We'll go to E. So let's play like, let's have a progression where we go 1, 6, 5, 4, which is exactly what we did in G, only now we're in the key of E major. E is also a good key for the open strings because a lot of them are in the key of E. The G you've got to be a bit careful of because G would be a flat third in E and that will potentially clash. But let's say we have a chord progression like that. So E, C sharp minor, B, A. Now I can do a little thing where I play a little chord fragment on the top 3 strings here, right? I've got my third finger on the B note, 4th fret on the 3rd string. My pinky is on the D sharp of the 2nd string, 4th fret, and we've got an open quality here with the E open string. And then I can play the roots of the progression, E, and then we had a C sharp minor, then we had B, and A. So what I'm doing here is I am playing those chords because these notes are in the chord, or if they're not directly in the chord, they will extend the chord. It'll give the chord a little bit of a nice flavor so that it's all in key, so you're not going to go wrong here. All you got to do is follow the root notes of the chord in the progression, the chords in the progression. So you got your E, and then we had our C sharp minor, so this is a C sharp minor type chord here. We've got the B and the A. And in fact, you know, you've got, you can grab the whole, almost, yeah, the whole scale there to do all sorts of chord progressions in the key of E. So that's another kind of thing that you do hear quite a bit in a lot of music, and it gives you a really nice sound and a different way to play the chord progression, again, aside from, you know, open chords and bar chords.
Let me unmute. Yes, I think this is great. And I think the other thing about having one note that continues, aside from melodic possibilities of changing the expected order of notes in the chord, it becomes easier when there's an anchor note or a note that we hear again and again to create melodic patterns that are recognizable. So the little pattern that you were just creating, it wasn't yet as fully formed as being a whole cycle of a riff, but it was definitely something that had a lot of melodic material, and it made me think of the Killers, the song Mr. Brightside, where we got, oh, that was good. We got these repeated notes. And so those repeated notes are giving us the, sorry about the like slightly hack playing of that, but you can hear, everyone who knows that song is going to recognize that. And really they've made that riff out of a diatonic chord progression. I'm pretty sure it's going to, I can't exactly remember what it is, but I don't think it's got any non-diatonic chords. But what makes that interesting and recognizable and immediately that style and that song is how they've used those repeating notes that are coming in through all of the chords. And and in fact, they're using open strings in that riff. So I didn't use it there because I learned in D flat. But yes, so you can, having these repeated notes sometimes on an open string allows you to create these melodic patterns that really characterize your chord progression and elevate it and give you the opportunity to create these specific melodies that sound cool. And you can, you know, play that on one guitar and we still know what the chords are. We can still hear them from that arrangement. So I love that tip, and I love how these, you know, we can all use our 2 fingers to do a thing with some open strings. So this is, you know, let's not make life too hard for ourselves.
Exactly. Take the easy way.
Great. So I love that. What's the next one?
Okay, so
You had finished that one. Pat, I don't want to cut you off in your prime. I just was overexcited by the open strings.
Sure. No, that's what I had for the open strings. I mean, they'll come back with some other things we'll get to, but yes, that's a couple of ideas with open strings and very simple chord shapes. Don't let certain things throw you thinking that they're advanced and you're not ready for them yet. Absolutely, you are. Now I've thrown a few things together in this second point, so and more or less to do with your picking hand. So we think of chords, we think of our fretting hand, we think of shapes we can play, and that's all, of course, good. But there's a lot of things we can do with our picking hand to make ourselves sound better playing chords. So this will be more about the picking hand than your fretting hand. So let's think dynamics. I mean, we don't want to play, you know, when we're strumming, let's say, a simple chord progression. I'll just stay on this for the moment, G, E minor, D, C. We will get on to other progressions, but we don't want to strum, you know, all the strings all the time, okay? Because that's going to be a very flat sound. It's not going to be very dynamic. We think of a sound wave. We want to have a nice, you know, variation from, you know, soft to loud, if you like, the different dynamics, all within a single bar of music. I'm not talking about soft in one part of the song and now let's play the progression louder. I'm talking more on a micro level here. Within a bar, we want to create dynamics when we're playing chords. So one thing is to target strings. So if I'm strumming on this chord progression, generally speaking, if I'm down strum, I'm going to be kind of hitting, this is approximate, you don't want to be too careful here because it will sound like you're trying to be too careful, but you're approximately sort of targeting the lower 3 strings with your down strum for the most part, and the upper 3 strings with your up strum. That's not always going to be the case, of course, but generally speaking. So if I take that chord progression, right, sort of on the down strums, the lower part of the chord, the up strums, the upper part of the chord. If I just strummed everything all the time, yeah, it's very loud and it's flat and it doesn't give you anywhere to go. Dynamics are so important. So that's a very simple way to make your strumming sound more dynamic. However, other things we can do would be a little bit more precise with the picking, and I do this quite often, and that is sort of on the first beat of the chord. So it might not necessarily be the first beat of the bar if you've got to change halfway through a bar, but wherever the chord change is, I kind of hit more or less the root note of the chord first before strumming. So with our progression, and again, I'm not trying to be too careful. I don't really care if I hit 2 strings and not just the root note of the chord. That's okay. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but that you're trying to get that separation from bass note to chord. So it's a bit of a bass note pick and strum approach. And it works particularly well on chord progressions that are using like slash chords. Right, so slash chords are where you replace the root note with another bass note and you get this sort of like bass walking down or walking up in your chord progression, and you really want that to be accented and sort of feature in the progression. So that's where you really want to sort of pick it out first before strumming the chord, and you get more dynamics to your playing that way. Another one is palm muting. So, you know, we don't have to have every strum ring out necessarily. We can hold some back while others, you know, are brought forward with palm mutings. So using the side of the palm of your hand just lightly on the strings over the bridge, and you can get that muting sound. So I'm doing a full mute there, but of course, if I mute some of the notes, some of the beats and not others, you know, we get more dynamic to our strum again. So it's simple things, but they make a difference to your overall chord playing. So sometimes it's not just about the chord you're playing and how many voicings you know or some new, nice, unique sounding chords. It's also about how you apply with the picking of your or use your picking hand. So that would be number 2, picking hand techniques for your chords.
The old muting. So yes, I think personally I always have to really work on my dynamics, because when I think I've made a big dynamic shift, I often haven't. So if I think I'm making a really big loud and quiet contrast, and then I record myself back on my phone and I hear it back, I realise that the difference is not as big as I thought it was. So how do you have any other tips apart from recording oneself for people to hear whether they're creating a lot of dynamic or not?
Well, I think it's really ultimately the proof is in recording. So if you can record yourself, you will be able to get an accurate representation of how you are. And you make a good point. You really exaggerate it. To train it, you want to really exaggerate it anyway, but you'll probably find you'll think you're really exaggerating it and you'll hear it back and it will sound quite good and it won't feel like you're kind of overdoing it. Another thing might be when you record yourself, even just like on your phone, you've got a little voice recorder. Um, you see a little waveform and you're recording. So that waveform, if you're playing with nice dynamics, a nice shape to your strumming or your picking or whatever it is you're doing, you should see a nice, looking waveform of peaks and troughs. If you're playing very much that same level all the time, it'll kind of be like a big, thick, flat kind of line, if you like. If that makes sense.
I had never thought of that. That is a good tip.
So you can get a visual representation. And of course, if you're recording GarageBand or whatever your DAW is, your recording software, you'll see that as well. So you can just see, it should look nice, a nice sort of waveform as opposed to just a, flat line. Flat line is not good in any sense, right? So we want to have that, bring that life to our playing and have it dynamic. But dynamics is its own thing again. But it's one of those things that you can be aware of and apply and immediately sound better. Then you can shape it and sound better again and again as you practice it, but it will immediately make a difference to your playing. And it really just comes from awareness first. And as soon as you are aware of it and you start to apply it, it'll make a big difference. So I'd say, what you said is great, Deanna. And a visual sort of waveform, which you've just basically on my iPhone, it'll give me that in the voice recorder. You can see it. And so you can kind of see, was that kind of dynamic? That's something I would suggest there.
The other thing for I don't know how many of you are songwriters who would be accompanying themselves performing the material that you've written, but for having loads of ways of playing the chords is really helpful if you're in that situation, so that you're not in a position where you have to ask the listener to remain engaged by like one style of playing the chords all the way through. So you can imagine having an intro played the way that Simon demonstrated first, and then a slightly louder section where we're getting that kind of, where we get the bass note and the rest of the chord, and that offers us a transition. And just again, for the songwriters and people who may be performing by themselves, there's another point of contrast there, which is how many notes we're hearing. So when we're hearing 2 or 3 notes, it's obviously going to, and we're hearing them one at a time, that's obviously going to be a different level of dynamic to when we're hearing all 6 strings and the notes are lower down. So whether the notes are lower down or whether they're higher up, these are all points of contrast that are hugely helpful if you want to create an arrangement of your song that remains interesting to the listener after like a minute or 2 minutes or into the 3rd minute. It's much easier to keep their attention if you've got different sounds coming out of your guitar. And it's not too hard to do, it takes a little bit of planning, but and certainly it wouldn't have occurred to me to do this when I started out. I just sort of banged out the chords the same way every single verse. But if you start putting this into practice, it really does raise the level of your arrangements for your song. So this is all super good stuff that took me years to figure out. So, but not because it's hard, just because it never occurred to me. So you'll be saved that time. Simon, let's have some more. What's a third way we can level up our chord playing?
Okay, so chord voicings. So we touched on triads before, and that's certainly a great way to voice out some chords, and triads is just a great thing to get into. When you get into triads, you kind of realize just how much you can do with them, and it helps your understanding of chords overall. But there are other things, simple things that we can do too, to kind of expand our chord voicings without having to try and memorize a whole lot of shapes and play all these awkward sort of chord shapes necessarily. So for example, let's have a look here. If I had a simple chord progression, let's say in A minor. So I've got an A minor. We'll go to the 4 chord of a D minor, sorry. and the E7, the 5 chord, back to the A minor. So I've got A minor, D minor, E7, back to A minor. Okay, so I could play an A minor add 9 chord. Now this is an A minor, but instead of the third finger being on the A note on the third string there, I take that off, I don't need that, and I use my pinky to play the B on the third string, the same string, 2 frets above the A. And that gives me a nice A add 9 chord. Now I can appreciate that might be a little tricky to play, going against what I was just saying, but I'll show you another way that you can play that, which is if you go to the 5th position and you simply play the A on the 7th fret of the 4th string, and your first finger's playing the C note on the 3rd string at the 5th fret, and you've got your open A string and your top 2 open strings, that's a really nice A minor add 9 chord. Very simple. It's really kind of around that area of triads and open strings I was doing before. So you could play it there, or you could play it down here. That's it. Okay, and you get a beautiful sound either way. They're both A minor add 9 chords. Now, coming back to our progression, for the D minor, instead of playing D minor here, open position, I'm going to play a little D minor chord up here at the 5th position with open strings again. Now, that shape there, you could think of that as a D chord. Think of your D chord open shape, and if you take your second finger off, so that's what we call a D suspended 2 chord, if you move it up 3 frets, it becomes a D minor 9 chord. Okay, don't worry why that is, just know that that's the shape, and you can play it here and get a beautiful sounding D minor 9. So I've got like my A minor add 9, then I've got my D minor 9, and for my E, I'm going to play a little bit of a dissonant E chord here. So these are like shapes that I'm using that are really simple to play, but give you quite advanced sounding chords. This is an E7 flat 9. Why is it flat 9? We don't care right now. Bigger picture, yeah, you want to know that. It would be handy, but it doesn't matter. You don't need to know it to use it. All that is, if you can see there, is a D chord shape, moved down a string set and up to the 6th position, and also droning the low E. I'm not playing the A string there because that would be out of key, so I'm avoiding that. Okay, so those 3 shapes, I mean, you had the option with the A minor add 9 down here, but if that's a little tricky, that's fine. This one up here is just as good, and puts you right in position for your D minor, your E, and back to your A minor add 9. So that's really nice. There's nothing wrong with this down here, but variety and some different voicings, and our E, and back to our A minor add 9. Another thing, let's have a look here. We could run you through a few different examples here for just in the area of chord voicings. Voicings simply means chord shapes, in case you're wondering what I mean by voicings, just the chord shape. So we could, let's think of, like, come back to triads again. Let's think of like a little vamp on E to A. Okay, so 1 chord to a 4 chord in the key of E is what we've got here. We've got our E and we've got our A. So let's think of the triad shapes. So let's think of this, root position triad shape as an E, which means you'd have to move all the way up here to the 12th position to get this as an E. And then I'm going to take my first finger away, so I'm left with just the 2 fingers. So the same approach I was doing in the key of G earlier. I can drone my low E, I get my open top strings, which is a really nice big open sound. And when I want to play the A chord, I just move down to the A position at the 5th fret, 5th position rather, and I'm playing in the 6th and 7th frets at that position. Same shape as I have for the E. So here's our E and our A. And when I play the A, I'm droning, of course, the open 5th string for the A chord, and then back to the low E for the E chord. So that works well in that key because you've got the roots as open strings low on the guitar. Now, the additional thing you can do here is I'll do this with the fingers here, but what you've got, your first finger is free, and you've got all these natural harmonics over the 12th fret there. So when you're playing with your second and third fingers that E chord, that first finger can play any of the harmonics on the 12th fret. And when you get down to A, you've got a couple here that you could kind of get if you wanted. I'd probably use my pinky there. Depends what fingers you're using. So you get a really nice...
This looks amazing, but is it hard?
No. No, it's not difficult at all. I mean, these aren't, harp harmonics. That'd be a different story.
Sure.
These are just,
Regular harmonics.
Regular harmonics. So you're going to find on the fretboard, you've got natural sounding harmonics directly over the fret at the 12th position. You get them at the 7th, and you get them at the 5th. They're the main sort of areas for your natural harmonics. So if I'm playing like the E chord around here, then I'm just using my first finger just to go not in between, but directly over the top of the fret. But I'm only touching the string. So it doesn't move at all. It's not going to press down on the fret, or else I'll get a muted note. It's just directly over the top of the fret, lightly touching. And it doesn't have to stay there. I can take it away, and the open string harmonic, which is essentially what you're playing there, will ring through. And it sounds really nice with those chords. So you can add that in. So that'll work with E and A. So just a different way that you could play a simple E to A chord progression, or indeed any chord progression that has an E or A chord in it. Another approach that I like to use a lot, if we're just talking about chord voicings, and let's go back to our first chord progression. No, let's go to the first chord progression, but let's change the keys. Let's go to the key of C, and I'm going to use 10th harmony. So 10th harmony is another really cool sound that, at its essence, is really implying a chord rather than being a chord. So, in its purest sense, anyway. So, if I've got a chord progression in the key of C, and I'll use bar chords, and you'll see why in a moment. I'm going to use bar chords to demonstrate this. So let's say I've got a 1 chord to a 5 chord to a 6 chord to a 4 chord, right? There's common chord progression areas: 1, 5, 6, 4. Now, 10th harmony, if I take the root note of my C chord and I go up the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then in 8 is the octave, and then I'm into the second octave, 9, 10. That is a 10th above the root of the chord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I can play the root note and this note a 10th above together, and I get 10th harmony. Now, you could think of it as the third of the chord, which E is, but an octave higher. It's another way you can think about it. The reason why I'm playing or relating it to the bar chord is because that 10th harmony shape is in the bar chord. It's the 6th string, the C note, and the 3rd string. So we don't need to hold this shape, of course. We can isolate those notes and play them together, and we get not so much a C chord. I mean, technically, yeah, I guess, but it's more implying the chord. And then you take that and you move it down the fretboard. So, Deanna,
Yeah, I was just going to say that if in sometimes it's quite helpful to know where you might recognize a certain sound from, and Scar Tissue by Red Hot Chili Peppers uses. I've got to stop playing examples that I don't know. Anyway, da 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 da. That intro is using tenths. Blackbird uses tenths.
Yeah.
So yes, those are just, if you're that sometimes, if that helps you kind of associate that sound, that could be a good way of doing that. It would just be really interesting while people are listening to you explain these, if there's which to know which ones are new to them from today that they hadn't necessarily had to go at before, and if they had any sense of having any big chord related questions. just feel free to put things in the chat. But yeah, so I love how tenths sound. Pray continue.
Okay, so yeah, tenth. So we're on this C, and so it's coming from the bar chord. So once you realize that, it's like, oh, yeah, okay. If you know your bar chord, then it's easy to find the tenth harmonies. If you don't know your bar chords, it doesn't matter. You don't need to know them to play tenth harmony. It's just a reference point. So the next chord in our progression was the 5-chord G. So there's our G tenth harmony. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In the key, the 5th chord in the key of C. Then we had the minor. Okay, so minor, it's going to drop that third down 1 fret, and you get your minor 10th harmony shape. There's only 2 shapes on when you stem it from the 6th string. Okay, it's this one or it's the major one. So we have that for the A minor, and then down to our F. Okay, so the shapes for our progression: C, then G, and then A minor down to F. Now, that sounds good, and that would be fine, probably as a secondary part. Someone's playing the chords and you can put that over the top, and then there's a lot of things you can do from there with it. But if you're playing on your own, and or even with somebody else, but you just want a fuller sound, then that's where our friends, the open strings, come in. And C is another good key for open strings because all the open strings are in the key of C. So you can't really go wrong bringing in open strings to your 10th harmony. So I've got the 10th harmony shape, but I'm also playing the open top 2 strings in just some sort of picking pattern. I can do the same over G, same over A minor, and F. And of course, this will give you different sorts of chords. This is a B in here, so it's kind of a C major 7 type chord. We won't get too analytical here, but we've got a G, it's got the E, so it's like a G6. The point being, you get extensions, which sounds, that's a sharp 11 there, the B over in the F chord. So that's a really Lydian sort of sound, for those of you familiar with modes. But it's a really nice way to play. And as you said, Deanna, yeah, Blackbird is a great example. That's all pretty much, right? All 10th harmony, more or less throughout that whole song with open strings. So that's a great example. And yes, Scar Tissue's another one. You really start to see and hear these things when you're made aware of them. And 10th harmony, I mean, it's 2 notes again. Okay, there are strings apart, but it's pretty simple. It's not very difficult to do. And I would say that the triads with 2 fingers and the 10th harmony is simpler than open chords. So, and also consistent shapes, right? When you're moving up and down the fretboard, you're not necessarily changing the shape so much as you are with open chords. So just to make the point that while this might sound difficult, it's actually not. It's not, I'm not going to say 5 minutes you're going to be doing it, but it's certainly not going to be months of practice before you get anything from it. Far from it. So that's, I mean, we could go on and on here, but we've got a couple other things we'll cover. So, but just some simple ways to create some nice chord voicings on the guitar that are not just going to be from the world of open and bar chords.
I thought of another example, which is the intro to 21 Guns by Green Day. Got these swells on the tenths.
Yeah, it's often, provides a nice, sometimes they're used sort of in a way that's sort of like, it creates like a string arrangement behind, often when I used to do a lot of unplugged music and do arrangements of songs, you'd hear songs and there'd be string arrangements in the songs. And I would, because I'd be playing secondary parts and someone else is strumming out the chords, I'd take those string parts, it might be like cellos and stuff and all that sort of thing, and I would play it using the either octave shapes, which are very similar, or 10th harmony, and you get some really nice sort of string-like arrangements to songs. So it's it's a great tool as a feature, but it's also really, really good as something that sort of sits nicely within the bigger chord progression, if you like.
I also really like what Tom Hess has written about how tenths can be combined with open strings. And I think one of the things that can be super effective about that is that you get this very wide span from low notes to high notes, more than you would get. If I'm playing an open E, the notes are kind of within 2 octaves. If I'm playing E and then I've got this 10th up here, let's see. I can have this very wide span of notes from it's going to go an extra octave, and that's going to give me more of a contrast. And again, maybe one time I'm going to play my E and I might just have it down here, but it's going to have a very different effect than if I play the whole of the E spread out like that using these tenths or this idea you had before of some of the drone notes. So it's going to sound very different. It's going to sound like more twinkly with high notes and more kind of chunky with the low notes. So I like that offers us contrast along in that way as well, in the way of which combinations of notes we're using, and are they close together or are they spread out, and are they lower pitches or higher pitches. And that really, there's so much expressive potential the guitar has that we just don't necessarily extract from it. So anyone who's seen much of my stuff knows that I'm really obsessed with this idea of how solo performers can get the most out of the guitar, and this I think is a great way to do that.
Yes, and you did just remind me, like another simple way of getting more out of the chords you already know or the shapes you already know. You sort of reminded me when you were talking about playing up here is open chords up the fretboard. Like so for example, even just like an E chord, that's great. But if we take that E chord and we move it up an octave, I've got the notes of the chord down here are up an octave, and then I've got open strings around it, and that's a really nice big sound if you want. And further to that, we can, let's say we've got a chord progression. I'll give a quick example here with the open chord idea, moving open chords up the neck. So let's say we've got a chord progression that's like C, and we go to D, and then we've got an F, and we've got a G. Okay, C, D, F, and G. I could take my C chord shape, and there it is, C major. But if I move that up 2 frets, that's the D chord. Now I've got some other open strings coming in that kind of change the flavor of the chord a little bit, but it's still C shape, but a D chord. So C here, D here. My F, I'm just working from the root note on the 5th string, right? So here's D. If I move it up so that I have F, then we get a really nice, cool sounding F chord with our C shape. And if I go 2 frets further up, I get to G. Okay, and what have we got there? We've got the E there, so that's like the 6th or the 13th. The rest of the notes are all in the chord. We get some unison going on with the open string G and the fretted note G. But so that chord progression, instead of this, we get this with the C shape. Or you could pick it out if you really want to bring out some of those notes. Okay, so, and there's a whole world of things you can do with shapes you already know. You're just moving the shapes around. And you hear this in songs too. This is a very common one, taking that up to a D instead of always going from this to your standard D. It makes a difference. And so that's still sort of under the voicings area of what we're covering today. Point 3, I think we're on. So perhaps I will move to number 4, if we're right for that, Deanna, which is extensions and embellishments. So I'll sort of put these under the same heading, if you like, the same area. So extensions and embellishments. So extensions is when you're extending the chord. So I've alluded to that throughout because, we're adding notes to chords to not so much change the function of the chord, like the quality, I should say, of the chord, but more to, have a larger spectrum within that quality. So think of like if you've got a box of pencils and you've got the blues, and let's say there's a range of blues. They're all blue, but there's light blue, there's navy blue, there's dark blue, and depending on the size and so forth, there might be a whole lot of other sorts of blues. That's kind of the same thing when we extend on chords. We've got C, but we can have C major, or we could have C with an added 9th, or we could put the 6 in there, or we could suspend the C chord, or we could put in a sharp 11. Like, these are all notes that we can add. But the quality is still C. It's still a major chord, C major, but it's got added notes to give it a different sound, more variety. So
I just want to add to that. When you say it's still a major chord, it is, but we've got it's like it's moved different versions of it are at different points on the brightness spectrum.
yeah.
And I think I just want to point that out to everybody, to draw that out, because that's one of the things that's super useful as a songwriter, is to have something that matches the sort of detail of what that mood is going to be in a certain area. You know, something that's major, but it's got an added element of something else. That might match a lyric or an idea where there's a little bit of hesitation or nuance or something not quite adding up, or you want some element of tension in the chord while still being in the general area. So these bits of detail, like, give us kind of, for our chord that we're in, it's like having a dial with loads of different settings for that same chord. Without going into a different chord world, we can still have a lot of control over how that's expressed, and I think that's really helpful for songwriters.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And when we do this, when we're so thinking in the context of keeping things simple, chord extensions doesn't necessarily mean you are adding notes to the chord, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to use more fingers. So, for example, with a C chord, if I want to play C major 7, I add the B note to it. To add the B note, I take a finger away. So don't always think it's going to be having to add fingers on and have more complicated shapes. I can extend that chord by adding the major 7, the B note, by removing the root on the second string, first fret. I can let's put this into a bit of a chord progression here. So let's stay in the key of C. And so let's say we have our C, our G, our A minor, and our F. Let's just stick with the 1, 5, 6, 4. So yes, on the C, I can take the first finger away and it gives me a B. I could put my pinky on the D note, third fret on the second string, to make it an add 9 chord. Now, you don't have to know what the chord is. If it sounds good, it's good. Preferably, you're going to want to note in the key for it to sound nice and consonant. But now, what you can do when you've got extensions, even just a couple of simple ones like this, is you can create movement over the static chord. So here's the C chord. So there's a little melody happening there within the C chord, if you like. So even just very simple little movements, it doesn't have to be anything too much, but the extensions kind of hinting towards sort of chord melody type playing, where you're playing chords and adding melody notes on top.
And here, from a songwriting perspective, I just want to add the point that quite often, if we're writing something in an improvisatory sort of way, like we're sitting with our guitar or keyboard, we can be inclined to change chords every bar because that drives the sense of contrast in what we're doing. And I never, in all the history of every album song I've ever written and released, I never had 4 bars in a section that were the same for that reason. But once I started getting a little bit more into how you can characterize and style a section of 4 bars of the same chord, I found that there's lots of interesting, rich detail you can get into just like this. So I think this is really helpful for thinking about songs in a broader way and thinking about a section being on a certain chord, and then how you can, things that you might want to do to keep that sounding interesting. And on the subject of the sort of also the different versions of chords, a really great example of this is Black Horse and a Cherry Tree by Katie Tunstall, because the chorus just has an E minor, and then she has D, and then she has D6, removing a finger, and C major 7. Hey yeah, hey yeah, yeah, yeah. I said hey yeah, you're not the one for me. And then she goes to a C7, C dominant 7 second time round. Sounds completely different. If you try and play that song with regular E minor, regular D, regular C, just sounds like it doesn't have the same heft. And she's not, you know, at that point she wasn't sort of super advanced guitarist, and these aren't super advanced chords, but they totally styled that section of that song. Like, that song doesn't sound right if you don't do those chords. So I always think it's very interesting.
Cool. Well, coming back to the example here, so we had the C, and we can add and take away notes to get some extensions. The next chord in our progression was the 5 chord G. Now, if I'm going to be adding extensions to the G chord, I'm not going to typically play the full 4 or 3 fingered G chord. You can't really add too much when you're forming a full G chord shape. So really, for a full G sound, you can get away with just using your 3rd finger on the root note and playing strings 4, 3, 2, open strings. That's a pretty big sounding G chord. We're not really taking too much away by simplifying it to that point, but we can then add extensions to the chord. In fact, I can pretty much play a full scale over the chord there. So that's the way I would go with the G chord a lot of the times if I'm adding extensions to the chord itself. And again, makes it quite simple. We had the A minor, so similar sort of thing. You can take the 3rd finger off and suspend the chord, or you could add your pinky to get the 7 in there, or you could take your 3rd finger off. Just different things that you can do that keep it very simple, but give you, again, that range of sound over an A minor chord. And similar on the F. On the F, I won't play the big bar chord shape because, again, it doesn't leave me a lot of sort of room for extensions as such. But here, if I've just got the little 3-fingered chord, like the little triad shape, I can add notes on top, or, you know, anywhere in the chord, and it will sound, most times it'll sound pretty good. You might hit a note that doesn't quite sound good, so, you know, avoid it. But there's simple ways that you can do that to add interest to your chord progression. So if we had a progression, what was it? It was like a C, and we just played it sort of standard. That sounds fine. But if I bring in some extensions, then right, we get a little bit more variation to the sound, a little bit more happening, and that can all be going on while someone's singing too. It's not going to really tread on the toes of the singer at all when done in sort of subtle ways like that. And then it just opens up a whole world of possibilities as far as extensions are concerned. So yeah, some ideas there for you know, decorating or sprucing up, if you like, spicing up typical common open chord progressions. Deanna, you're muted.
Every time. I do think that giving yourself a blues in C or a blues in G and setting yourself the task of arranging the chords is that kind of thing where you start with something very, very standard is one of the best ways to develop your skills in this area. And then when you've done something like that, you can take the passage you like the most and use that as the kernel for starting a new song. So where did your interest, what was it that first opened your eyes to all of this?
I don't know. I mean, if I'm thinking of chords, I mean, I went many years, I mean, in context to my whole playing, probably, you know, not so much, but quite a few years where I just played open and bar chords. And then any sort of chord I played that wasn't an open or bar chord was because it was in a song that I was learning. So I'd play the chord and I could play it in the context of the song, but I couldn't really understand, you know, it outside of that. So it wasn't really any good to me other than the song that I was playing it in. So it wasn't until I started sort of studying jazz in the late 90s where then that totally opened up for me. But you don't need to study jazz for that. In fact, as you hopefully we are demonstrating here, you don't really need much more than basic open chord technique. and you're good to go on a lot of these things.
I definitely relate. I learnt open chords, bar chords, and power chords, and then that's where I was for a very long time.
Yeah.
So, but I think, hopefully people can hear how much more there is to be had without necessarily needing to learn a whole load of new vocab. And so, what you've shown us with the open chords, well, people who know open chords are going to be able to do that right away. Then the tenths, that's taking two fingers out of the bar chords. So anyone who plays bar chords, and even if you can't play bar chords, you're going to be able to play these. So this is very helpful. Do you think you have another one for us?
Yes, I got one more thing here. So it's often, like for many, many years, I play chord progressions, and I would see chords pop up in the progression, and they wouldn't quite make sense to me, but they'd sound really good. And for quite a while, I didn't really know what these were. I learnt the sound, and I kind of, by just seeing it so many times, it kind of made sense to me on one level, but I really couldn't. If someone asked me to explain it to them, I wouldn't have known how to explain it. So this is under the guise of sort of theory and being able to massively broaden what you can do with chord progressions. And for me personally, I can only hear so much as far as diatonic chord progressions are concerned. I mean, they're beautiful, but and there's some great songs written with them, but there's other things we can bring from outside of the key to our chord progressions that really give you so much more to play with and will help you understand a lot of the music that you hear. So these are big things. I'm going to do my best to just touch on them briefly here with the time we've got. But I do have YouTube videos that go into this on my channel in much greater depth. So perhaps I'll post them in the chat after, because I probably won't do the concepts here full justice, but they are well worth exploring, because again, this is just a little bit of knowledge. You can do all this stuff with open chords. So this is not getting any better technically. It's just, and it's nothing hugely, rocket science like, if you like. It's reasonably simple with some basic theory knowledge. But anyway, I'll get into it here. So one is borrowed chords. So we can borrow chords from other keys. So one very common approach is borrowing from the parallel minor key. So by that, we are saying that, let's say we're in the key of C. We have chords available to us in the key of C. We've got the 1 chord, we've got the 2 chord, we've got the 3, we've got the 4, we've got the 5, we've got the 6, we've got the 7, and we've got back to 1. They're the diatonic chords in the key, meaning all the chords belong to the key. All the notes in the chord are in the key, okay? So that sounds great, and that's why they all work nicely together, because they all share these common tones. But we can borrow from the parallel minor, which means we can borrow chords from the C minor, the key of C minor, and put them into our C major chord progression. So, for example, a very common thing to do is to borrow the 4 minor chords, or the 4 chord from C minor. So if I'm playing like in C major, and I've got a C, and I've got a G chord, and I've got an F chord, sometimes you hear this before perhaps returning to C. So you got like a C chord, you've got a G, let's say, you've got F major, and then F minor back to C. That F minor is coming from C minor. The 4 chord in C minor is F minor. So we're just simply taking that and putting it into our C major chord progression for a really cool sound. Another common one is, let's say, okay, so here we've got the F, and I'm putting in a B flat chord there. That B flat is a chord coming from C minor, and I call that the flat 7, because in the context of C major here, it's the 7 chord flatted, okay, it's a 7 chord flat, okay. So that's a very common one as well to put into your C major chord progression, if you like. Or you could, there's a variety of ones that you can typically grab and put in. Now, if you just sort of throw it in any sort of ad hoc way, it might sound horrible, but so can really diatonic chords put in a bad order, if you like. So it's a little bit of experimenting, but also looking at examples. I'll give you a good example here of a chord progression using borrowed chords. We're going to be in the key of G here. It's a really good chord progression, this one, using borrowed chords. So it's a song by Soundgarden called Black Hole Sun. So I think it's in an open tuning or a low D, I think at least. I'm not like that, but that's okay. I'll just play sort of standard chords. But the chord progression goes like this. We've got G, B flat, F, E minor, E flat, D, and then it goes G, F, A flat, back to the G. I mean, what a great chord progression, the way those chords work together. And half of them aren't in the key. We got this nice chromatic E minor, E flat to D. Then you got your G, F, A flat, which is a half step, resolving back to the G. That's just such a great chord progression. And it's using borrowed chords. So you got your one chord, the B flat is borrowed, it's a flat 3 chord. You got your flat 7 chord F, diatonic chord E flat, E minor. Then you got a borrowed chord, a flat 6 chord, E flat to D. Then you got your diatonic G, flat 7, flat 2, back to your G. You're never getting that sound staying in a key, strictly within a key. And that's a really good example of some really borrowed. Now, they're all coming from G minor. If you look at the chords in G minor, all those chords, B flat, F, E flat, are all there, A flat. And so they're coming from the parallel minor. So that's a good example of just a chord progression that's using borrowed chords.
I love how you explained this, because I used to write chord progressions like this, but without knowing why. Because that sound always really appealed to me, that kind of more unpredictable chord progression. But I just was it was wild trial and error. I had no sense of like, oh, I think I'll try the flat 3. Oh, this is just the spot for a flat 7. I just, it was completely random. But it's helpful knowing at least where you might look to get that sound.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
mean, if it sounds good, it is good, and there's going to be a reason why that works. And the thing with borrowed chords is, if you look at the borrowed chords and you were to write out the notes of the borrowed chords, you're going to see that they share at least one, probably 2 diatonic tones. So 2 of the notes in the chord will still be in the key of G, but one of them's from minor. So G and G minor do share common tones. And so it's not going to be, there's still going to be enough in relation to the chord and the key you're in for it to work, rather than just being something that's completely out, which can still work. But there is, tones that are shared. I mean, in the F chord, you've still got a C, you've got the A, so there's 2 notes that are in the key of G. The F is not in the key of G. That's what gives it the flat 7 sound and still works. So it's still kind of, a lot of G major is still in that G minor chord, if that makes sense.
actually, that point about shared notes I think it's really helpful, because typically when I would do this with absolutely no theoretical knowledge, I would be humming a note, and then I would be playing the chord and seeing how the chord felt against the note, and then I would either retain or reject the chord accordingly. No pun intended. So I think a really good way of exploring this and seeing what kind of contrast your ear likes is to pick one note and then play as many chords as you can that have that note in them. And if you're not sure how you'd work out which chords have that note in them, I have a table I can send you, or you use Google, and that'll tell you which chords. And you don't have to go, it doesn't have to be like all 40 chords that would have that note. It's a bizarre extension. Even just the ones that would have it as a root 3rd, 5th, 7th, add 9, that's, I think, a really nice way to explore how those sounds combine. It's quite easy. Not that anyone asked me, but.
Excellent. Well, the other thing that comes to mind is secondary dominance. dominant chords, secondary dominant chords. So if we're in, let's say we're in the key of, we'll just stay in the key of C here. We've got like a primary dominant chord. It's the 5 chord. And the 5 chord, always your ear wants to hear the 5. Okay, we're in, just get our ear into the key of C because we were in the key of G just now. So we're in the key of C here. So the 5 chord, you want to hear it resolve to the 1 chord. And that's the primary dominant. We don't really call it primary dominant. It's just the dominant chord. Okay, but it resolves 5 to 1. So the secondary dominant concept is that every other chord in the key of C also has a dominant, a 5th above it that will resolve nicely to it. So if I've got a D minor chord, I can play an A7 and resolve to D minor. That's the 2 chord. So I've got the 5 of the 2 chord is what is happening there. And that 5 chord is outside of the key, right? A7 is not a chord in C major. It's a dominant 6 chord. It's got the C sharp in there. But it works because it resolves to a chord in the key. Okay, so it's the 5 of the 2. And if we've got an E minor, we can 5 to 1. So the B7 is the 5 of the E minor chord. We've got the 5 to the 4 chord. That's the C7. Okay, and so on and so forth. I won't go through all the possibilities, but so it's not only the 1 chord that has the 5, every other chord can have a 5, and that's the secondary dominant when you do that with the other chords within the key. So perhaps an example here of the secondary dominant at play, you'll see it a lot. And this was another one I would see, and I'd think, why is it A7? It's not A minor 7 because we're in the key of C. And so I just sort of learned, okay, well, that's just something you can do sometimes, and it sounds cool. But then when I eventually learned about secondary dominance, it made a lot of sense. And then I was able to understand the music I was seeing and then use those concepts myself. So there's a song, right? For the Longest Time, Billy Joel. Okay, and I just play it on the guitar because you don't want to hear me sing. Okay, so now that chord progression, when he gets into the verse of that song, what's it do? It's like the chorus is, right? D, A, so all diatonic, and then it's into the D. Right, you got this little slash chord. Now here, there, E7 to A. That E is not in the key that we're in here, but it is resolving to, it's the 5 of the A chord. And you can really hear it, right? We're coming down, we're in the key of D here, right? So D, the 5 of the 5 chord. The 5 chord is A in the key of D. We're playing the E before it. That's the secondary dominant. Then he goes to F sharp to B minor. That's the 5. F sharp is the 5 of the B minor chord. B minor is the 6th chord in the key of D. The F sharp is the 5 of the 6th chord. And then I think he does like a A7, so primary dominant there, and then D7 to G. So I'll just sort of put that together and see if you can hear that secondary dominant. You've got the walk down, G to the D, and the second time is secondary dominant to A, another secondary dominant, and the actual dominant, and then back to our. Okay, so it's one example, but they're everywhere. Secondary dominants, they're in a lot of blues. Topical for this time of the year, you won't find too many Christmas carols without secondary dominance. A lot of Christmas carols have secondary dominance in them as well. So a really cool concept that, you know, it's just arming yourself with a little bit of knowledge, and then it can go a long, long, long way. And you'll see these sorts of things all the time. And it just gives you so much more to play with. If you just stay diatonic, as many as there are of great music out there that's purely diatonic, we would be missing a whole lot of stuff if we never used borrowed chords, secondary dominants, etc. It's throughout a lot of music you hear. So really cool concept to, bring more interest to the chords and progressions you play.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, and I really like that sound when we have some chords that are not from the key. So if for me the big challenge was to make writing songs with diatonic chords feel interesting, and even having having a flat 7 chord in there just gives a bit of extra momentum and energy to a chord progression. So thank you very much for those excellent 5 ways to level up your chord playing. I've pasted some of them in the comments in case anyone wants to just be reminded of the first ones. And now I think you've got something for our viewers that they can take home with them. I'm going to put it on the screen just now.
Sure. Yeah.
Tell us about this.
Okay. Well, this is a ebook, and accompanying all the examples in the ebook are videos of me playing through them. And the basic concept here is not totally unrelated to what we're talking about here, and that is finger picking. So if you're into finger picking, these are 10 very simple finger picking patterns applied to not so standard chord progressions. Okay, so a lot of the concepts I talk about here today are used in this ebook in a finger picking context. So the primary thing is to develop some finger picking patterns, and the misconception is that you've got to have some real difficult complicated pattern to sound good. And really, if you just isolate a finger picking pattern, it's pretty plain and pretty boring on its own. It's what you're doing here that really counts for how this will sound. So we look at 10 common patterns, and then some really unique ways to apply it to different chord progressions. So, similar to like when I was playing some of the progressions earlier, this A1 in A minor with the A minor add 9, this type of thing. It's that along those lines. And so everything's laid out for you there. There's a webpage you'll be taken to from within the ebook to see me play the examples, and you'll have the music for it, the tablature, etc. And it's a way to develop your finger picking in very simple ways. And I would say, again, if you can play open chords and bar chords, you can certainly do the things presented to you in this ebook. So if you're interested in finger picking, or it's something you've thought about but you haven't got around to, then this would be a really good place to start. And you can grab it there from the address or the link Deanna's kindly put in the chat. And it's free. So grab it. And I always appreciate the feedback. Let me know how you go with it.
I think the fingerstyle techniques in this ebook would be a really great complement to some of the chord ideas that you've shared today. And I can personally vouch for the quality of Simon's incentives, having downloaded many of them in ebooks, having downloaded many of them in the past. So I definitely will be going to check that one out myself. I also have something for you. This is 5 Ways to Write Great Lyrics, and it's everything I wish I'd known when I started out. So I really, like many of us who come to songwriting from being music fans, if we were to look at what we thought songwriting was, there's nothing in the experience of being a fan that gives you a good idea of what songwriting is. You basically, your experience is as a fan that you listen to the songs written by the artists that you like. You maybe go to their gigs, and you maybe read their interviews. And if you get as far as reading any of their interviews, the things that they say about their songwriting tend to be quite abstract, and nothing in any of that would enable you to think there's any kind of common principles into songs that work. So, but there are things to do with how you use language, there are things to do with how you get ideas, there are things to do with how you sequence your ideas and how you combine the meaning of the language with the musical elements, and all of those are really helpful to know, and I've laid them out for you in this book. So do go and grab it. I'm going to post the link in the chat for that as well. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. It has been great for me to hear Simon's ideas, and I know that you'll get a lot out of it if you implement his suggestions. Let me just get rid of this. Wow, I've been so slick today. There. Thank you very much.
You're very well. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. Thank you, everyone who has watched this today and who might be watching in the future. And yeah, let us know how you get on with these ideas.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks for everyone who has been here today. I appreciate it.